Donald Trump's unfriendly, at times downright adversarial behavior towards allies has the world bracing for this weekend's G7 summit in France. The New York Times writing, quote, "Most of the other leaders of the group of seven powers will no doubt save their eye rolling for when he is not looking, but they have come to see mercurial behavior as the new norm by this president." In fact, France's President Emmanuel Macron has already taken steps to avoid the controversy of last year's summit, where Trump surprised the other six nations by announcing he refused to sign their joint statement after he left. CNBC reporting, quote, "The Group of Seven summit is set to end without a joint communique for the first time in its 44-year history after Macron decided to abandon the tradition, citing, quote, a very deep crisis of democracy." NBC News White House correspondent Peter Alexander joins us. Peter, I know you're not going there. You're not taking this trip, but you've been on a fair number of these trips before. Give us just a slight sense of how incredible it is that for the first time in the history of this august organization, we're not going to have, predetermined in advance, we're not going to have a joint communique at the end of it.
I think, John, a good way to look at the G7 summit, the president departing for France tomorrow, is that this is really the beginning of the Bash the Allies season. You'll remember at the end of the last G7, which was hosted by Canada, where the president, upon his departure, and once he got on Air Force One, attacked his host, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, as being dishonest and weak, of course, attacking an ally while he was en route to see Kim Jong-un, North Korea's dictator here. But this is striking. And the bottom line is, we heard from Emmanuel Macron this week. He said, in effect, this would be pointless to put forth a joint communique because we know that the U.S. is not on board with, among other things, the Paris Climate Accord. The bottom line is there are going to be differences on climate change, on Iran, certainly on tariffs here. So, in effect, there's no value in that, as some foreign policy experts we've been speaking to this week have described it. What was once the G8, now the G7, they say, is more like the G7 minus one.
Wow.
John?
I mean, wow, that's pretty stiff beer there, Rick Stengel.
Yes.
Again, this is another thing you've done a fair amount of. You've been to a fair number of G7s.
A lot of stiff beer.
And a lot of stiff beers.
Okay.
You know, what is it, as we head into this event, which has been governed by customs and traditions and norms for a really long time, in the worst and best of times, what does it say to you about America's place in the world that the president of France is describing the situation as a deep crisis of democracy, but which he just, I think, means Donald Trump's a problem?
Well, it means we do not have a leader of the free world, or at least the leader of the free world is not the president of the United States, which has always been the case. I mean, as Peter laid it out, the thing that's so disturbing is not that we're the outlier in the G7, which we are now, but we were formerly the leader of the G7. That basically we organized it, we created it, we set up the policy, and the world is not a good place when there is not American leadership. When America withdraws from anywhere in the world, we're never replaced by a better actor. And we're withdrawing everywhere. America First is about consolidating at home and, waving a small stick abroad. And I think that's bad for the world. It's bad for America. And it is 100% Donald Trump.
Elise Jordan, I'm going to read you a little bit from this Reuters piece about Emmanuel Macron, who apparently thinks now in the abdication of President Trump, that he might be the leader of the free world. This is a story about Macron to meet Iranians before G7 to float ideas for defunding the crisis. France's President Emmanuel Macron said on Wednesday he would meet Iranian officials ahead of this weekend's G7 summit to make proposals aimed at de-escalating tensions between Washington and Tehran. European leaders have struggled to tamp down the brewing confrontation since U.S. President Donald Trump pulled his country out of Iran's internationally brokered 2015 nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions on the Iranian economy. That, to me, I mean, the Iranian thing is an issue unto itself, but the assertion of French leadership, again, says something pretty incredible about where we stand right now.
Well, there's a leadership vacuum, and so the French and Emmanuel Macron, they're moving to get in there. You look at where is the UK right now. The UK has so much turmoil. You look at Italy, where right now they're in the middle of their own governance crisis as the pro-Trump forces, I would describe them as, in Italy, are coming to the forefront. The Eurozone has huge issues that they have to resolve among themselves. So you're going into a G7 this weekend where it's a very fractured and divided political scene with plenty of key players that are fighting among themselves.
In some respects, it's worse than that. I want to play this sound from yesterday. There was so much yesterday in Trump's long, rambling tirade that a lot of people miss this, which read to a lot of people as if Donald Trump was not just didn't care about his European allies, but was actually directly threatening them. Let's play this little piece of sound.
We're holding thousands of ISIS fighters right now, and Europe has to take them. And if Europe doesn't take them, I'll have no choice but to release them into the countries from which they came, which is Germany and France and other places. We're going to tell them, and we've already told them, take these prisoners that we've captured, because the United States is not going to put them in Guantanamo for the next 50 years and pay for it.
Eddie, the clear, you listen to what he just said there. Right. We're holding thousands of ISIS fighters. If Europe doesn't take them willingly, we're going to release them into those European countries. I don't know how else to describe that other than a threat to American allies in Europe.
I mean, absolutely. And it's not only a threat to them, it's a threat to the now, to the description. So if you're going to release people into these countries, then you can't call them allies anymore. Right. And see, this is the key. Since the American carnage was inaugurated, this fellow has decided that he was going to attack the post-World War II consensus, that he was going to undermine it at every turn. And now it is very clear that he has been doing it, and he will continue to do it. And what was once the G7, whatever Macron said about Trump, they are doing what they're moving ahead with their agenda. The United States is just simply on the outside.
I think we just need to be clear how dangerous that statement is. The idea that we're just going to release.
Let me explain what's super dangerous about it. I'm sorry. I've never heard of us holding thousands of ISIS fighters in Europe. I think he's making that up. I mean, I was on the front lines against combating ISIS messaging for 3 years. We have very, very few ISIS prisoners. I mean, you could count them on the fingers of two hands. So I have no idea what Donald Trump is talking about.
It could not only be a threat, but it could be a fraudulent threat on top of everything else. Yeah. I want to get back to my friend and fellow Wildcat, Peter Alexander, who yesterday had a moment with Donald Trump that made some news. We're going to play that moment, and then we're going to talk to Peter about it on the other side. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sir, you said Russia was kicked out of the G8 because they outsmarted. You said Russia was kicked out of the G8 because they outsmarted Obama. In fact, it was because they annexed Crimea. You know that. They're still there. Why would you let them back in? They're still there. Why let them back in?
Russia outsmarted President Obama. They took over during his term, not during mine, Crimea.
They're still there. Why let them in now?
They took over Crimea. If you'd stop being an organ of the Democrats, I mean, you'd let me answer the question. I'll answer it very easily. It's a very simple question. The fact is, President Putin totally outsmarted President Obama on Crimea and other things, including the red line in the sand, all right? He made a living on outsmarting President Obama. And frankly, because of it, Obama was upset, and he got Obama out of what was the G8 into the G7. I think Russia should be a part of it because we're looking for world peace.
So, Peter, there's Donald Trump doing everything possible to cozy up to Russia while calling you, I believe, something I've never called you, as I always call you, a fellow Northwestern Wildcat with pride. He called you an organ of the Democrats, I believe.
Well, here's the bottom line, and I brought up the G7 leaders' statement from March of 2014, if the president needs a reminder of it. It was not because President Obama was outsmarted. As the remaining 7 members of the G7 said at the time, that violation of international law, they warned, could have grave implications for the legal order that protects the unity and sovereignty of our states. The bottom line is it was because Russia had annexed Crimea. My question was simple. He didn't answer it. It's Russia is still there. They still control Crimea. Emmanuel Macron just this week said what would be key to allowing them back in for their readmission was for them to take steps to help resolve the situation there in eastern Ukraine. But the bottom line is the president, who has been courting Vladimir Putin and courting a relationship with Russia from the very beginning, this is where he stands. This is his position. I think there was no better sort of demonstration of it than we saw right there. And what was equally striking was that this came in the same 48-hour window that the president was attacking the prime minister of Denmark. And what's critical as you're attacking one of our NATO allies is that Denmark per capita lost more lives in Iraq and Afghanistan fighting alongside the U.S. than any other NATO ally. So while the president was embracing, in effect, Russia, he was attacking Denmark, and it was setting up what would potentially be a remarkable moment, which is when the U.S. hosts next year's G7 in the United States, that if it were to come to pass, Vladimir Putin would be coming here to the U.S.
Peter, I note that you didn't rise to my organ of the Democrats bait because you think it's beneath you, right?
We'll let it be.
Yeah, I mean, the only organ that Peter Alexander reminds me of is he has the voice that's as sweet as a finely tuned church organ.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.